Now back to our top story, the tussle over the government's planned media reforms to tackle complaints handling procedures and the concentration of ownership. With Independent MP Rob Oakeshott indicating that he'll vote against the new legislation, a decision either way from Independent member for New England Tony Windsor has become critical. He joined me just a short time ago from our Parliament House studio. Tony Windsor, welcome back to Lateline.
Oh, thanks, Emma.
Fellow Independent MP Rob Oakeshott says he won't support the media reforms. That now makes your vote critical for the government. What have you decided?
Well, it may make my vote critical, but talking to the others in the crossbench today, I don't think the numbers are there for a great portion of this to get through them. If the government decides to cut it into segments, there may be a chance of getting the numbers to get some of it up. But I think in relation to the advocate, for instance, that seems to be a real issue with some within the press. I doubt very much whether the numbers are there for that to go ahead. When
you say cut it into segments, what do you mean?
Well, there's 6 bills in relation to this, and they all deal with different parts of media law or media reform. I think the coalition, from what I'm hearing, would support part of it, where the licence rebate, the television licence fee issue is being addressed through a bill. I think the Parliament would probably support it. So that's 1/6 of the reform package.
Now that's the issue, that the licence fee would 50% would be rebated if they joined the Press Council and agreed to keep the funding going.
Yeah. So I think that there wouldn't be a problem there. I think there may well be a feeling that the numbers are there to do something in relation to the diversity, so that there's concern that 1 or 2 players will actually take over most of the media within Australia. I think there's probably a view within the crossbench that the numbers would support the government in relation to that. But in some of
having a public interest test.
Well, a public interest test in relation to media diversity. There's also the public interest test, which deals with the advocate, and I think that's a contentious issue that probably hasn't got the numbers. I know Bob Catter, for instance, I'm told, is looking at a variation to that theme, rather than have one person being the press industry advocate, that a group of 3 be looked at. So there's a whole range of permutations and combinations out there, but regrettably, given the time frame that's been given to deal with this, I think a number on the crossbench are starting to say, well, if it's take it or leave it, we'll leave it for the moment. Let's try and organise it a bit better in the future. If it's take some and leave others, deal with the bills one at a time, there may be the possibility of getting a few of those bills up. But in my view, not in relation to the way in which the PEMA advocate has been talked about.
If it is take it or leave it, how do you vote?
Well, I'd leave it. And I think it'd be dead.
So the Prime Minister has reiterated again today that there'll be no horse trading on this legislation, but she has said she'll listen to any sensible suggestions. You've mentioned one from Bob Catter. Is that gaining some momentum among crossbenchers, this idea for 3 people instead of the 1 public interest media advocate?
Well, there's some interest there. There's no doubt about that. Whether there's sufficient numbers to do that, because Craig Thompson said, as I understand it, that he's not participating, he won't support it, and now the opposition have said, well, they won't support his democratically elected vote, even though this is supposed to be about democracy in a sense. If you listen to Kim Williams and the assault on democracy, it'd be fairly cute if, in fact, this all went down because of Abbott removed one of his people so that he couldn't accept Craig Thompson's vote. So you've got all this side play going on as well, but there's a feeling there, in my view, that most of it is unachievable within the deadline.
How long would you have liked to debate this issue?
Well, I think another week where you could actually sit with some of the players, and I got to talk to some of the media people today. Not everybody's of the Kim Williams view of the world. A lot of the print and television media do see concerns long term there in terms of the scrutiny of the media and the way in which the Press Council has worked in the past and how it possibly should work in the future. But they don't like having the imposition of a government regulation upon them. Now, whether some of the circumstances that have been talked about actually come to fruition, if that under the ministerial appointment, or whether in Bob Catter's case there were 3 appointments and a board was set up to look at that. Ideally, the Press Council, the press themselves, self-regulating is the best way to go. But there's a number of instances, and that was shown during the review process, where that's not the case. And that's the issue here, is to we'd love you to do it yourself, boys, but if you're not going to do it properly, that's just asking for trouble. Now, there's a lot of them who come into the building today and they've said, oh, we don't want trouble, we'll do it ourselves. Well, let's see that happen. And if there was another week in this, I think you could bring some of those players together, maybe not the News Limited people, but some of the others, to actually come up with some sort of consensus in how they would improve their self-regulation and actually put some real boundaries around the issues that people are concerned about.
Because as it stands now, the Australian Press Council is held to ransom, really, by the media organisations. If they don't like a ruling, they can and do withdraw funding and walk away. Are you concerned about that arrangement staying as is if these reforms fall flat?
Most people in here on the crossbench particularly, including myself, have had enough time to actually look at this. And it actually goes to the sincerity of what the government's trying to do here. You know, to put a week on an issue like this is really asking for trouble at the start of it. Another week, and I can understand why they don't want another week, because another week actually leaves them open to News Limited's gunfire for another 5 weeks, because we're not back till May. I can understand all that, but expecting the crossbench to sort of pick up the load there and say, well, we'll all do it in a hurry because you're concerned about the criticism you might get over the next 5 or 6 weeks. You know, I don't think that's an effective way to run policy, and I think that's why Rob Oakeshott has decided to just move back out of this, and it may be why Craig Thompson has. But that's going to make it difficult now for the numbers in any form or other to be gained, particularly in relation to the Advocate and some of the other issues that are there. Are
you questioning the government's sincerity in speeding this up as they have?
Not really, but it could be excused for asking the question. Is that, you know, if it's take it or leave it, and that was what the Minister actually said only last week, late last week, when everybody suddenly saw these documents, and some within the government didn't see them prior to that either. So if it's take it or leave it, that's a bit of a gun at the head of the Parliament, and particularly at the head of the crossbench. In effect, if that's the ultimatum, then they'll probably have it left. You know, if they can split some off, whether they may get support for some of it, but I don't think they're going to get support for all of it.
Malcolm Turnbull says these reforms amount to nothing more than Senator Conroy's revenge on News Limited. Is that how you see this, at least in part?
No, I don't. And I'd hope that's not the case. I think, you know, News Limited are probably, you know, the greater of the felons in all of this, in a sense, when people actually look at the way in which some of the reporting's taken place. So people could be excused for saying it's all about targeting them, but it is about a response to a major inquiry that was set up to look at how the press relates to its future. It relates to you know, the online issues. It relates to the ownership issues. It relates to the regional issues, the regional reach issues. All of those things are in there. A lot of very positive stuff in this, and there's been a focus on News Limited, and I've probably fallen into the same trap by focusing a bit on them tonight. But it goes to this very issue of the Press Council. Now, the media industry can fix that up themselves. What it's shown to do, though, is it hasn't bothered to do it because it doesn't think it has to. It can get away with the old games and put pressure on different people to perform. So I don't think that's what the Australian public want. They want a media that's not afraid of reporting the truth, but moving away from inventing it occasionally.
Now let's move on to the government's legislation to give itself power to stop coal seam gas projects that could harm the water supply. Now that's back for debate in the House tomorrow. Do you expect it to get through?
I'm hopeful that it will. I think the majority of the crossbench, if not all of them, will support it. I think the Greens will support it as well. And I'd be surprised if the coalition didn't. I know there's different arguments within the coalition, but water is a very important ingredient. And we've seen, after the initiation by John Howard some years back now, the Murray-Darling plan finally put in place by Tony Burke and the current Parliament, and that's been a great success. But what it's indicated as well is that we're prepared to look at water outside state boundaries and look at the national ramifications of it. This amendment that the government's putting up, and I'd like to think I've been partly instrumental in having it there, actually builds on that foundation that people want a process when it comes to water that they can have some confidence in, and particularly in relation to coal seam gas. Right across the eastern seaboard, we're getting concerns, lack of confidence in the state-based processes. Large coal mines, people are worried about what does this do to water resources, how does this impact on groundwater resources and the way in which gravity carries water off-site of particular mining or coal seam gas developments. What this is about is putting science in place, and I was able to achieve $200 million to go towards an independent scientific committee to look at these issues last year. So this amendment really brings the Commonwealth into play in terms of the advice that independent scientific committee would produce, and would give the Commonwealth some power of oversight here. We tried to do this another way with the states through a national partnerships agreement about 12 months ago now. New South Wales in particular just thumbed its nose at the Commonwealth and said, no, we're not going to play the spirit of the game, we just want the money. So Tony Burke and the Prime Minister, to a credit, have decided to move on this, and I think long term, not only in the interest of the Australian community and natural resource management, but also in the interest of the mining sector, because we only need one calamity to occur in a sensitive groundwater area, and it'll mean that a lot of coal seam gas or coal mines that may well have gone ahead under the correct protocols would cease because of the calamity.
How do you think the states are likely to respond?
Well, probably not well. Chris Archer and Barry O'Farrell probably won't respond too well in New South Wales. But there again lies the problem. They've had a flawed process. They blamed the Labor state government, and I agree with them. We're seeing it played out on the ICAC as we speak. Absolutely flawed policy. There was a commitment by the coalition when it came into government in New South Wales to fix this up. If they've done anything, they've probably made it worse in terms of process. The people have no confidence in the process at all. By introducing science rather than the size of the wallet or the deficit or the surplus of the New South Wales budget, introducing science and risk to help make the assessment, it actually potentially gives the community greater confidence. They mightn't like some of the outcomes, because this is not about stopping things, it's about allowing things to happen under a risk profile that's scientifically assessed rather than assessed by a Department of Planning or the Treasury of a particular state.
Finally, I wanted to ask you about what kind of feedback you're getting from the people of New England about this constant rumbling about the Labor leadership.
Not as much as you probably think. I think, it's rumbling around in the media all the time, but I don't get people coming up to me in the street saying we'd prefer some person to some other person, and that's the honest answer. I get people coming up to the street saying, wish you hadn't sided with the Labor Party, could have gone with the others, or those sorts of comments are there, but then they would have been there if I'd gone the other way as well. So not a lot in terms of who the Prime Minister should be. The Labor Party's got to have a good look at itself, though. At the start of this process, Rob Oakeshott and I particularly looked at whether there was either Tony Abbott or Julia Gillard were in a stable position to actually administer a hung parliament. Very difficult thing to do. If the Labor Party itself at this time in the parliamentary cycle can't agree whether who's stable enough to run the place, they don't deserve to have the longevity of our support. And if they want to make up their mind whether they want one leader or the other, and if they do, well and good, but they can't expect, in my case at least, that that's a transferable document. And if they continue with this election mode and this whole business about who the leader is, well, they might get to an election quicker than September the 14th.
Tony Windsor, thanks very much for taking the time to speak to us tonight.
Thanks, Emma.